In the last video, I introduced you to one type of generator object called a symmetry object, and that helped us generate symmetrical copies of objects. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to a different type of generator object that allows us to procedurally generate geometry using splines. And this is going to be perfect for us to use to create the fishbowl that our crab is going to be living inside. All right, so here's our crab character, and we're going to build a nice fishbowl for this crab to live inside. Now, I mentioned we're going to be using a generator that helps us generate geometry based off of splines. And what we're going to use, if we go into our generator menu here, is a generator object called a lathe. Now, if you're familiar with woodworking or anything like that, a lathe in Cinema 4D will basically create geometry by revolving a spline around the y-axis center, okay? So the first step is to actually create a spline that is going to be then rotated around this y-axis here. And the best way to create a spline is not in like a 3D perspective view, but along a 2D plane view. So let's go ahead and go to our front view by hitting the F4 key. And you'll see we're now in our front view here. And what we can start to do in this 2D YX plane is basically create the profile of our fishbowl. Now, to start generating a spline, we're going to need to go and activate our spline pen tool. You can see it right over here, or if you go into the spline menu, you can see the spline pen tool here as well. I'm just going to grab it, and that will then make this spline tool active. And you'll see all these spline pen options. The defaults are going to be great for us right now. And what I'm going to do is start by creating the top lip of the fishbowl. So I'm going to click and drag, and this is going to act a lot like your pen tool in, say, Adobe Illustrator, where you click and drag and you got these Bezier handles. The great thing about the spline pen tool, we get this nice preview of what the spline is going to look like. So if I click and drag again to create another point, you can see that we're creating this nice lip, top lip of this fishbowl. And I'm just going to roughly kind of create this fishbowl. And what I'm going to do is actually break the Bezier handle by holding the Shift key down. And when I'm holding the Shift key down, I can break my Bezier handle like so. And I can create this bottom lip here. And the key to the game here is to make sure that where our fishbowl ends is right smack down the center of our y-axis here. So right about here. Now, what would help us out is if I could snap to this grid line right here. And luckily we can do that by going up here and clicking and holding. And this is where we can enable snapping. So I'm just going to choose Enable Snap. And what I can do is click on this menu here, and it's going to bring up all of these snapping options. Basically, you tell Cinema 4D what do you want to snap to. You can snap to a bunch of different things. I'm going to go ahead and just activate this grid work plane, and that basically means we'll snap to this grid line or the grid point right here. Okay, if I twirl this down, you can see that we are going to snap to grid points and grid lines. So I will go ahead and just click right there, and that will then snap. So this is looking good. If I wanted to say snap to this grid line right here, just to make sure that this bottom of the fishbowl is flat, I could totally do that. And then once you're done with the snap tool, you can either come up to your snapping menu and clicking the Enable Snap to turn it off, or you can hit Shift S. And that will turn off your snapping. So I'm done creating this spline for the most part. So I'm going to get out of the pen tool by hitting Escape, and that will basically finish your spline. So you can see there's a spline object in here. I'm just going to rename this Fishbowl Spline. And then what we can do now is edit the spline. So I can select this point right here, adjust the Bezier handles here, and really fine tune this fishbowl spline here. So maybe a little something like this. And I accidentally clicked off and created a new spline. I did not want to do that, so I'm just going to Command or Control Z to undo that. And I'll click and just adjust this. And really, you can't get a good idea of what this is going to look like until we actually put this inside a lathe object. So let's go ahead and we'll say this is looking pretty good for now. And I'm going to get out of my pen tool again by hitting the escape key. And let's actually go to our 4-up view by clicking this top right button right here to toggle active view. And with that fishbowl spline selected, I'm going to go into my generators menu, hover over lathe. And remember, we can hold down the Command or Alt key down to make this object a parent of the selected object here. And now you can see we have a pretty nice looking fishbowl here. Now we can't see our crab inside there, but luckily, if we go over to our lathe menu here in the Attributes Manager and go to Basic, there's this X-ray option where if we click that on, it'll make our object semi-transparent and we can actually see through it to see our object underneath it. So we can see the crab chilling in there. Now we can go in here and say select this spline again and just start finessing this. Maybe we need to add a point. We can do that by holding the Control key down and you can see this little slice line. I can just click and add a new point, kind of move this around if I want to. If I want to select multiple points, I can hit the 0 key to bring up my rectangular selection. Click and drag, maybe get all these points here and move them up, maybe move them out. Maybe I'll select this point here, move that out as well. Then I can always look in my perspective view to see how this is looking. So maybe I decide this bottom lip, maybe I bring this down a little bit. If I want to get back to editing these Bezier handles again, I can either go back to my pen tool or I can hit E to grab my move tool and start selecting these Bezier handles. Hold the shift key down again to break those Bezier handles. Hit the 0 key to get the rectangular selection tool and hit the E key to move. So you can see we're getting a pretty nice bubbly looking fishbowl. Of course, you can make your fishbowl whatever kind of shape that you want. Again, helps to use references to use as a guide to create whatever type of fishbowl that you want. But I would say this is looking pretty nice. So let's go ahead and let's just say we're done for now. I'm going to double click on this lathe object and name it fishbowl and hit enter. And I'm just going to twirl up this object. Now, of course, we don't want our crab just to be floating in midair in our fishbowl. So what we can do is create a bit of sand using the same lathe generation technique. So if I go back to my front view here and let's go back to our pen tool, let's create the profile of maybe some sand that's right down here. So I want to snap to this center. So I'm going to activate snapping again. So we can either come up here or again, the shortcut key for this is Shift S. So I'll hit Shift S to bring up the snapping and I'll just snap to this grid here. And then I'll turn off snapping, Shift S, and then click and drag and click and drag again. And I'll turn on snapping, Shift S, and snap to this center again and turn off snapping again, Shift S, and then hit Escape to complete that spline. And now I can go ahead and edit this spline. So again, we can edit this multiple ways, whether if we're still on the pen tool or if I hit the E key, I can get the move tool. And as long as I'm in point mode up here, I can edit the points on this spline. Now, if I was in model mode here, or polygon or edge mode, I would not be able to access these spline points. So very important to learn these modes up here. So if you want to edit points, make sure you're in point mode. And now we can grab these points. And you can see that I can't access these Bezier handles. And this is a common thing that might come up. And that's because I accidentally selected the fishbowl. So I have multiple objects selected. So if I just make sure I'm selecting that spline, I can select just the Bezier handle here and increase the length of those handles. Okay? So with a little bit more tweaking here, you move this up. A little something like this. Let's see what this looks like when it's lathed. Control key down, and let's go back to our perspective view by hitting F1, and you can see that we got this nice little bit of sand that our crab is resting on. Let's go back to our 4-up view here and maybe make this a little bit, maybe move this down so it's a little bit deeper in the bowl. I'd say this is looking pretty nice. So if I hit F1 to go back to my perspective view, we can go and grab our crab character here and just move it up so it's resting on the sand and kind of see what this looks like. Now, if we decide that maybe the fishbowl is a little bit too wide or too tall, instead of going back into our point mode, we can just select both of these lathes here and hit the T key and maybe shrink them down in the X or in the Y. Okay, so you can see you can edit this with just using the scale tool as well. Now, I don't know about you, but I think the crab is happy inside this nice fishbowl. I'm just going to double click on this lathe and rename this sand. And let's twirl that up. And one last thing I want to do is create a little bit of thickness to this fishbowl here. And you're going to notice I can't click on this fishbowl because I'm still in point mode. Okay, so remember, if we want to select objects and not points, we need to make sure we're in this use model mode and click on that cube there. And now I can select this fishbowl, move it around. Of course, I don't want to move it around necessarily. So to add some thickness pretty easily, what we're going to do is we're going to go back into our generators menu and find the aptly named thicken generator. And what this does is applies thickness or procedural extruding to an object. So we can thicken this up super easily. And so with my fishbowl lathe object selected, I'm going to hold the Alt or Option key down, release my mouse, and that will place the thicken generator as a parent of the fishbowl. And you'll see we lost our X-ray vision here. And that's because we had the X-ray on the lathe, but now we're actually generating new geometry with this thicken. So we need to then just go and activate the X-ray on the thicken object. And you can see now we can see through and see our little crab through the fishbowl again. And so if we go to the thicken object properties here, you can see we have a bunch of options here. The most important are these three right here. So the one is the actual thickness here. And so if I hit N and then B to go to garage shading with lines, and I make this a little bit bigger, you can see, okay, there is this little lip that is thickening right there. Okay, so you can see that we're actually kind of growing from the center outwards and extruding outwards and inwards at the same time. Now, what if we just wanted to say extrude outwards, because we precisely made this spline so we weren't kind of intersecting the sand object here. And if we make this thicker inwards and outwards, we're going to have some intersections going on. So what we can actually do is adjust where we are extruding from. Are we extruding from the center inwards or from the center outwards by adjusting this position here? So -100, we're going to extrude or thicken inwards. And if we go to +100%, we are going to thicken outwards like so. So let's give this about a thickness of 8. And now everything's kind of looking good, but we're getting pretty close. If we go too high, we're going to get this getting so thick that our polygons are going to intersect here. And when we apply glass materials and stuff, it's going to look pretty wonky. So we want to make sure we're not making this so big that we are intersecting polygons. Now, it looks good at the top here, but if I go to the bottom here, and especially if I go to my 4-up view and just kind of maximize my front view here, you can see we're actually intersecting polygons right here. So what we can do is we can either just make this a little bit less thick, or we can go inwards like so, or we can stick with it going outwards and then just going into our fishbowl spline, going to point mode so we can access these points and select this point right here. And what we can do is basically chamfer or bevel this point, break it into 2 points, and kind of round this sharp edge out. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to right click and go to chamfer. And if I click and drag, you can see this breaks this out into 2 points. And now I'm kind of increasing the space between these 2 points. And if I hit the E key to get the move tool and just move this 1 point down, kind of adjust like this, you can see I no longer really have, well, I got a little bit of intersections there. So let's go and kind of smooth this out here. So I think at this point, we no longer have any intersections going on there, which is good. And we can go back to our perspective view. And so that's the thickness and position. If we wanted to add subdivisions, if I zoom in here, it's actually going to add subdivisions right here in this little extruded bit. And we don't necessarily need that extra information. So I'm just going to bring that subdivision back down to 0. And then I will hit N and then A to get out of our garage shading with lines. And you can see we now have a fishbowl that's got a little bit of thickness that our little crab can live in. So what's great about working in Cinema 4D and using all these generators is that everything's live, everything's editable. If you need to adjust something like we did with the thicken generator and adjust the spline, we can go in and do that. And because everything is so art directable, it's one of the many strengths of Cinema 4D. Now there's loads of other types of generator objects that you should familiarize yourself with, so be sure to do some exploring on your own, and remember that you can always go to the help and show help to search for certain objects and learn more about them.